Good morning, afternoon, evening or night, whenever you're watching this, welcome. About a year ago I saw a video on YouTube by Tom Scott with the eye-catching title, The Most Dangerous Stretch of Water in the World. And then in quick succession I saw quite a few others with similar titles, but with the qualitative nuance that Tom Scott put in his title stripped out, leaving clickbait hyperbole like, the world's most dangerous river. For most of its length, this river is like most other rivers in this area. It is more dangerous, but not much more dangerous than some of the rivers I go wading in. But here, there is something very different. A very short stretch of extremely dangerous water. Is it the most dangerous stretch of water in the world though? Or is that claim a bit too far of a stretch? In this video I'm visiting a place known as the Strid on the River Wharfe in North Yorkshire, and after that I'll head about a mile downstream to the ruins of Bolton Priory, a place that owes its existence to the danger and tragedy of the Strid. First though, we'll walk through quite beautiful woodland to get to the river. In the top branches of that tree there is a large raptor bird. I caught a vague glimpse of it landing and it looked a bit like it could be an eagle, wingspan of about a metre. That's not an eagle call. That, I think, might be a red kite. I know they've been seen and photographed around here. Red kites were persecuted to extinction in England and Scotland by the 1870s. Conservation efforts now mean there's permanent populations across the UK again. Wrong camera for such an encounter, but for my eyes at least, that was a real treat. I am stood now almost exactly where the famous romantic artist William Turner once stood, drawing and painting this very view in 1808. It hasn't changed much in the last 213 years. The large building in the distance is Bolton Tower, a 15th century hunting lodge and rather grand house, built on the foundations of a much earlier building and falling into dereliction by the time Turner painted it. It's quite a pretty ruin now. My friends the Johnsons of the YouTube channel Let's Go With the Johnsons featured it up close in one of their recent videos. I think I'll link it in the description, and I might film there too one day. I did look into the possibility of Bolton Tower being connected to the main story that I'm going to focus on today, but it's younger, and though it certainly stands on the site of an older hunting lodge, it is not clear if that was there in the 12th century. It is perhaps telling that there is a life ring positioned so as to be available to throw out to anyone who's fallen or ventured into the water downstream of the Strid. But there is not one alongside the Strid. This is the downstream end, and the water is welling up in places, swirling like Van Gogh's Starry Night in others, and there are holes drilled into the rock on the banks, much bigger than similar ones I know of in other streams and rivers. When this river rises, it has immense power. The name Strid, in the case of this place, comes from the Old English word strith, meaning turmoil, and it is not difficult to imagine it in full spate, swirling pebbles so violently they chew holes in the bedrock. That is one of the dangers here. When it rains upstream, the water rises, and the narrow gap between the rocks channels the water faster, and the water can rise extremely fast. Several times in recorded history it has risen 5 feet, or 152.4 centimeters, in a single minute. And that would take me where I'm currently stood. Over time, Strith was corrupted to Strid, and the idea that it was a striding place settled over it, and that is the generally accepted meaning of the name Strid in several other places around the UK. In places, this particular Strid is quite narrow, almost narrow enough to take a long jumping stride across. I could jump that, but I wouldn't risk it. In the year 1154 AD, the young Lord William de Romilly, heir to huge swathes of English land and aristocratic titles and castles and even a vague possibility of a throne of Scotland, went hunting alone in these woods. It is believed that he made an attempt to leap across the Strid, with the result that his body was never found. Lady Alice de Romilly, his mother, in her disconsolate sorrow, made a gift of the lands here to the black canons of the Augustinian order for the founding of a priory, so that they may pray for the soul of her lost son. It is the death here of William de Romilly that shaped the future, now, history of this valley. If he had lived, he may well have become a large ingredient in a divergent melting pot of English and Scottish history, and it is unlikely that this valley would have been gifted to the church so soon, if at all. Other people have died here. There is no official death count that I can find. There were cases before William de Romilly and cases after. In relatively recent history, 1998, a honeymooning couple are thought to have been swept away by a rapid rise in the water level. Tragic as these deaths are, it is a relatively small number, and there are rivers in the world that kill thousands. So, by what metric is this short 91-metre section of water considered the most dangerous in the world? By the simple fact that there is no record of anyone falling in and surviving. There is nuance, of course. People have gone in willingly and come out again, but as far as I can find out, only participants in some special army training, and they had a great many safety procedures in place beforehand, were wearing high-capacity scuba tanks, padding, and were tied to ropes tied to teammates who stayed on dry land to pull them out. There are people who've gone in willingly without such precautions, and they, like the people who fell in accidentally, died. The danger here is, in part, that it doesn't look all that dangerous. It tempts people to think that it is not. In part, it is also that it rises spectacularly fast and sweeps away people who were walking beside it. But mostly, the danger is that this narrow stream is a river turned on its side, and that creates some very unusual conditions that are very difficult to survive. The river speeds up as it is squeezed between the rocks and falls into a narrow crevasse that it has carved. Not a neat and easy to navigate carved out space. It has scooped out hollows and overhangs, tunnels and traps. It looks quite shallow over that side, but at this side it plunges away into darkness. The underwater landscape here is largely unmapped, and the currents are phenomenally strong, pulling things down, holding them down, and sometimes never letting go. It is possible that the Strid might still hold the bones of William de Romilly. The water is constantly wearing away and reshaping the rocks beneath the surface, and less constantly, but certainly quite fast, eroding the rocks above it. My feet are about 6 foot above the current water level, and I can't hope to estimate how many days above this level it would take the river to drill this hole, but I'd guess a lot. This is hard Yorkshire gritstone, commonly used throughout history as millstones to grind grain, well known for being tough and hard to wear down. And that hole is one of the smallest holes here. My point, I guess, is that the river must rise up a lot. Another danger is, as well as the powerful currents, there's a thick layer of bubbles over much of the water, which means that a human body having a relative density much greater than the highly spaced out water would immediately sink below that layer and find it nigh on impossible to swim back up through it. Ahead is where the river starts to narrow. It is noisy, so I will let it speak for itself. In the comment sections below other videos about this place, people mentioned other rivers, other dangerous stretches, and I agree, they are very dangerous. For instance, falling off Angel Falls in Venezuela would almost certainly result in death, just like falling in here would. Falling over Niagara Falls would likely have similar results. The Zambezi River has dense patches of crocodiles and hippos and white water in the upper reaches that massively dwarfs the entrance to the Strid here. And my personal favourite, which I didn't see in the comments till I wrote it there myself, is in the Peruvian Amazon. There is a 4-mile-long tributary river known to the local tribespeople as Shunay Timpishka, whose waters are hot, heated by geothermal vents beneath the riverbed. In parts it reaches 100 degrees Celsius, 212 Fahrenheit, 373.15 Kelvin, the maximum temperature of liquid pure water in a non-pressurized state. But there the dangers are obvious, and people are not generally tempted to jump over or into boiling water. People are not known to have been swept over Angel Falls either. They are known to have been swept over Niagara Falls, sometimes accidentally and sadly more often than not. But some of those people survive. And some people end up unprepared and unprotected in water with crocodiles and hippos and even freshwater bull sharks and piranhas, and survive. The dangers here are not very obvious. There are signs up warning people in vague terms. The Strid is dangerous and has claimed lives in the past. Please stand well back and beware slippery rocks. But I've talked to a few of the other visitors here today, and they did not know much at all about this place, beyond what those signs say. People are known to fall in here through carelessness, slippery rocks, and sometimes bravado. There are no known survivors. Upstream from this point, it looks no more dangerous than any of the streams and rivers I filmed in before, tempting even to come back in the summer and have a river walk up to Baden Tower. There wouldn't be much to find, but it is a beautiful little valley with a long history of human habitation. A piece of vintage glass, quite thick, I'm unsure how old. This and some rusty modern metal are the only relics I've found so far. No time to try and find more now. I must go if I want to film at the Priory. It's late autumn and I have a little less than an hour of light left. The Bolton Abbey estate is approximately 29,000 acres, comprising moorland, farmland, residential and commercial properties, 8 miles of river, a church and ruins. The ruins of a priory. Not all of it actually. Some of it still stands as the church. It was in 1155 that Alistair Romilly of Skipton gifted the land to the Augustinian order to build a priory here, and for 384 years members of the order lived, worked and died here. I cannot find out if all 29,000 acres were part of the original gift, or if by savvy investment of their revenues, canons regular of the priory were able to expand upon it. Canons regular were kind of a midpoint between monks and priests, some of them barely distinguishable from one or the other. Anyway, 384 years of monastic life here came to an end in 1539 during the dissolution of the monasteries, which came about largely as a result of King Henry VIII's desperate quest for a male heir. Pope Clement VII found the argument that Henry should be allowed to annul his marriage of 24 years to Catherine of Aragon simply because she had passed childbearing age without a surviving son, insufficient grounds to grant him his wish. Before the end of the dissolution, he had declared himself the supreme head of the Church of England, annulled his marriage, and married Anne Boleyn, a former handmaiden of his former wife. He annulled his second marriage too, and then had her executed. His third wife, Jane Seymour, gave him the son he so desperately wanted, and then died 12 days later of postnatal complications. And he went on to have 3 more wives, exhibiting behaviour along the way very ill-fitting for the supposed head of a church and head of state. But then, that is so often the way of things. The dissolution of the monasteries stripped this priory of their lands and valuable assets, and even the lead from the roofs. The canons and friars were given a small pension. Couldn't find out what happened to the 200 lay brothers who did most of the manual labour on the estate. The prior at the time, Richard Moon, negotiated with Henry VIII's right-hand man, Thomas Cromwell, and was given permission to keep using half of the main church building as a smaller church for the local population. The other buildings were not torn down. The cost of demolition would have eaten into the loot considerably, so instead they were rented out until they started falling down. Without the lead on the roofs, deterioration would have begun almost immediately. Thomas Cromwell was, in large part, the architect of the dissolution, a rather successful attempt to decimate the authority of the Pope in England. He couched it in terms of reformation and stamping out immoral behaviour and corruption, but ultimately it was mostly a vast and often corrupt money grab, benefiting King Henry and the Crown estate, some of his cronies, and of course Cromwell himself. That was until Henry had him executed for treason and heresy before the job was finished, and most likely because Henry went off his 4th wife, Anne of Cleves, who Cromwell had set him up with. Moral of the story? No, not much morality exhibited, but fascinating history. The UK has a lot of that. On one of the occasions that I was brought here as a child, we only lived 23 miles away. I think it was my dad who taught me this rhyme. Wharfe is clear and air is live. Where air kills 1, Wharfe kills 5. I have filmed many times on the banks and in the waters of River Aire, and recognise the dangers without often feeling them to be beyond me and my capabilities. This is the first time I've filmed at the River Wharfe, and the conditions and currents don't look particularly challenging this far downstream of the Strid, but the warning signs are here for a reason, and I don't think the reason is really on the warning signs. It is sometimes the strong currents, sometimes the submerged rocks, but outside of the Strid, the main reason that people get into trouble in this river is cold shock. There are a few popular spots downstream with some picturesque waterfalls, and on the very hottest days of the year, they are thronged with people who are not used to cold water swimming. This river does not warm up easily, so people jump in to cool off and go into shock. Sometimes so far into shock that they suffer heart attacks, or enough short-term paralysis to drown. So, yeah, it's probably now much more than 5 times as deadly as the River Aire, because this one is prettier, and hardly anyone tries to swim in the air anymore. This is a macabre video, isn't it? Perhaps I should just quietly enjoy the surroundings for a while. While the ruination of such beautiful buildings, and especially the motives behind that, are sad to contemplate, it is still very easy to find beauty in such a place. The ruin is beautiful in itself, and the fact that part of it held on beyond the dissolution of the monasteries and into the present is also beautiful. For 866 years this place has been a place of worship. This would have been the cloisters. Cloisters, I think, are my favourite parts of medieval architecture. The covered walkway around an enclosed courtyard where people would read and write and learn. I think I'd include them in the design of a self-built house, if such a thing was ever a practical and financial possibility for me. There is a small sculpture up there of a young man in a tunic. Could that be a representation of William de Romilly? Surprisingly, no findable information online about it. The graveyard here is still very much in use, but the earliest gravestone I've seen here is 18th century, and I suspect that there was once stairs here going down to a crypt, perhaps where the priors and canons regular were once interred. Crypts are my second favourite parts of old Christian buildings. I'm running very low on light, so I will start drawing this video to a close. This video is very different to ones I've done before. I expect it will draw views from people who are not all that interested in my other video content, and that's okay. Hopefully it won't have alienated my existing audience. By all means, if you're new to this channel and want to, check out some of my other videos and subscribe if you like, don't if you don't. I will be back to mudlarking and river walking videos next. I do have a large stack of videos waiting to be edited over the winter, and this one jumped the queue because I've been wanting to film this one for more than a year, and things just kept getting in the way. It was two videos in particular that inspired me to try filming the Strid. Tom Scott's, which I mentioned at the beginning, and a video done by Crusader Dan, a bottle digger, fellow mudlark and history hunter. Quite a different style to my videos, but I think a lot of my usual audience will enjoy his videos, as do I, so I will link his and Tom Scott's videos in the description. I do hope that you've enjoyed this video. If you have, and if you'd like to, then any show of appreciation is very much appreciated. I hope you're looking after yourself and your loved ones as best you can. Thank you all very much for watching, and for now, goodbye.